This is George Gruhn speaking to you from Gruhn Guitars on 9/11/2020, 19th anniversary of the 9/11 attack in New York and Pennsylvania. I still remember that day very vividly. I was driving into work and I had local public radio station tuned on. That was when I first heard about the first plane hitting. And then as I was driving, the second plane hit. So obviously a memorable day. And it's also my daughter's, Julia's birthday, which she never has forgiven. Having a birthday falling on a date like that. But here we are today in a very different world, although we still suffer those consequences that happened that very day, not only for the families who were directly impacted, but for virtually everybody else today. That the whole situation in the Mideast and much of the rest of the world and today's politics, a lot of that still has been dramatically impacted by that day. So we're not over it yet. But the guitar market, in spite of the coronavirus pandemic, is very much alive and well, although we're quite aware too that many professional musicians are currently not earning any income. But we are still very active here. People still want guitars. And we are still very actively in business. It's been an amazing time this year. We've been more adaptable sometimes than I ever believed we could be. But we are open 6 days a week. We are serving 4 at a time downstairs showroom for walk-in customers, 2 at a time upstairs here. We have handled throughout the entire pandemic phone, email, online orders, appraisals, but times can be challenging. But we have been remarkably adaptable, and I hope that for our listeners out there that you are doing well. We haven't gotten as many questions quite as usual today, enough to keep us going. But for anybody who has a question, by all means, send it on in because I will answer them today. I'd like to start by bringing Greg Voros, our shop repair foreman, on to talk about a guitar that we've gotten in and that he's been very much involved with. So he's going to join me right here. I'll just move over and he can sit with me.
All right.
And he's quite able to speak for himself and tell you about this one.
Hello, everyone. So I thought I'd come on the program here with George to show you guys a beautiful 1960 Sunburst Les Paul. And we just finished it. And I just finished it up in the shop. We did a little bit of work on it, some fret work, a little bit of inlay work, but it really didn't need much work considering that it's such a clean instrument. But it's the perfect instrument to show you guys for this video. So I'm sure you guys are able to see what makes this instrument incredibly special, and that would be the factory Bigsby and the double white bobbin PAF pickups. Okay. The two of those make this instrument one of the holy grails of collectible electric guitars. This one is incredibly special to me. I haven't seen very many with true factory Bigsby's. George, I'm sure you've seen
very few.
Very few, okay. Usually when you would see a Sunburst Les Paul or a Burst, you would see the stop tail holes from the studs themselves peeking out right behind the Bigsby. And it's a really interesting sight to take the Bigsby off and not have that underneath it. and there's only just 2 small screw holes, and I think it's a beautiful thing, and it really it's a beautiful sight when you see an instrument so clean in condition to have that with a factory original Bigsby as well. The other thing was, it was almost a blessing in disguise that the covers were loose on this instrument. At some point they were removed. So that gave me the opportunity to go ahead and slip those solder joints without breaking original joints to expose these beautiful white bobbin PAFs. A 1960, so the super early 1960s are special in many ways, but the main reason is that it has a 59 neck profile. And that's what everyone looks for. So you have a 1958, a 59, and a 60 burst. Those are the most sought after electric guitars on the planet. The 59s are most sought after in large part due to the neck profile. Everyone loves the way the neck feels on a 59. The super early 1960s also have the same or super similar neck profile, but they're almost always coupled with white bobbin PAFs. That's why they have a little bit of a following for very early 60s Les Pauls.
Also, note that the finish on the top is not a brilliantly defined cherry sunburst. However, under the Bigsby,
right,
under the pick guard, and in this pickup cavity, where the instrument did not receive UV light,
correct,
it's bright red.
It's bright red. The tan line is gorgeous. It's really obvious in where it was. And it's a beautiful sight.
The red on the back, right, is still very much there, yeah, because the back was not exposed much to light.
That's right.
But the stain that they used on the sunburst Pauls, see, cherry red that unfortunately was UV sensitive.
That's right. And
would fade. And there are a number of colors prone to that, particularly red and blue.
Right.
Sometimes the stain on some of them faded to green. So I've had a few bursts that were apple green sunbursts, except for areas where it was not exposed to UV. And there were very, very few sunbursts that were tobacco sunbursts. Right. That's also extremely rare. But this is plenty rare in terms of the number of them that you see that came originally with the double whites is extremely few, and primarily very early in the year 1960. Right. You'll also see double whites fairly commonly in ES355s of that period. But at any rate, this is a guitar that has not been through many owners.
Not been through many owners. And what a great opportunity to chat about this instrument on the program. The vast majority, if not all, of the Sunburst Les Pauls, 58, 59, or 60 that pass through the building, to be honest with you, don't make it up on the website. They don't ever make it to the website, and we don't get a chance to chat about it in this way because they usually sell before we can actually present them to the public in that way. So I thought this was a great opportunity to chat about this instrument.
Well, it is something very special. It's been many years since we've had one that had an original factory Bigsby. So not everybody wants a Bigsby, but for those who do, this would be an absolutely ultimate guitar.
Agreed.
And we would never recommend putting a Bigsby on an original with a stop tailpiece.
No.
Nor would we recommend taking the Bigsby off of this one and installing a stop tailpiece. That would be equally a terrible mistake.
Agreed.
But this is a fine guitar.
Yeah, and it's in fantastic. What would you grade this instrument condition-wise?
Well, the condition of this guitar I would certainly call exceptionally fine. It's I think a lot of people might call it near mint, but it has a little bit of wear on the edge right here. One little spot, about half an inch. It's not really down to bare wood, but there's a couple of scratches, but it's a guitar that shows extremely little playing wear. So it's just a very exceptional example. So it may not be highly figured, but it's still attractive maple.
Oh
And it's an attractive guitar, and it sure enough is attractive sounding as well.
It sounds fantastic.
It plays well, it sounds great, and it's a superlatively good playable guitar.
Agreed.
So we're proud to have this one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
yeah, so there was a question that recently came in, and we do quite a bit of work on celebrity-owned instruments, players, Nashville local famous folks, whatever it might be. But we do a lot of work in that way. It's interesting that this question came in. I sometimes ask, like, how do folks know what's on our benches, upstairs? But we do a lot of work for Tom Bukovac. We do a lot of work. I just recently did some work on his 335. Did some fret work. That's where I find myself doing a lot for him, and that's been the case for over a decade or so. But yeah, he always has a nice 335 from the late 50s, 59, 58, or 59 or 60. But on that one, it was fret work. Fret work is what I wound up doing to that instrument. Yeah.
okay, so I will go onward from here.
That's good.
Let me cover one question, then we'll bring Tony on for some stuff. Dave Farrow in Wonderview, Colorado says, I have a Martin E28, which I love dearly. It is a wonderful player, and I was wondering what you can tell me about it and why Martin decided to discontinue their electric guitars after such a short run. Well, from 79 into the early 80s, Martin did some solid body electric guitars. They were actually not made in the Martin main factory. They were made in a building that they had set up for Fives Drums, which under Frank Martin, they had bought that company, but they decided that the drums weren't doing as well as they'd like, and they could make guitars in that building. So they did solid body electrics. The E28 model was made only from 80 through 83. It featured 2 Seymour Duncan pickups uncovered, and 4 knobs. The electronic switch system was really not all that much different from a Les Paul. But it had a peg head shape that was somewhat reminiscent of what Martin had done in the mid-1830s with the Stauffer style peg head, not a squared off Martin shaped peg head at all. It had a peg head that was actually unique to the Martin electrics, but was somewhat reminiscent of the Stauffer design, although it had, unlike Stauffer, which had 6 tuners on a side, this had 3 on a side. At any rate, they were good guitars, but they didn't catch on. They aesthetically didn't look the way rockers wanted. And they just didn't seem to get what either rock players or country players wanted. So it ended up that they were not very cost effective for Martin in making them. They didn't sell as well as they would have liked. They made a few models, style 18 and 28, starting in 79, but the E28 was strictly 80 through 83, and some of the others started in 79, but they all got discontinued in 83, and it simply wasn't very successful. Martin had also made hollow body electrics back in the 60s, and frankly, those were not a great success either. Martin's great success was flat top steel string guitars and ukuleles, which they excel at. And so far as I'm concerned, they are still some of the finest guitars ever made by any company ever. And Martin flat tops are our best selling new guitars. And we have been told that we are Martin's #1 independent, sort of like mom and pop type store. We're not comparing ourselves in sales volume with Sweetwater or Ash that has over 40 stores, or Guitar Center that has close to 400 stores. But so far as an independent freestanding store, we are a large-scale Martin dealer, handle a lot of their custom shop stuff as well as new, and think very highly of them. Now I'd like to bring Tony on.
Take care, guys.
We can talk about another interesting guitar that he has worked on. And, this is a 1931 OM 28 Martin. This is a model that was first introduced late 1929 and was Martin's first 14-fret 6-string guitar. And this is a very important model historically. OM stood for Orchestra Model. It's the same body size and shape as the 14-fret 00028 that came in 34. This has the 25.4-inch scale, and this one from mid-1931 is early enough that it still has inlays only at positions 5, 7, and 9 on the fingerboard. We can hold that up close enough that they could see that. That's the early slotted diamond inlays at just those 3 positions. At that point, Martin figured you didn't really need a position marker for first or third. If you couldn't figure that out, you couldn't play. And you really probably didn't need one for 12th fret, because that's just 2 frets short of the end of the body. You can figure out where that is. So it was somewhat minimalist, but it does have herringbone edge trim, Adirondack spruce top, Brazilian rosewood back sides, and peghead veneer, mahogany neck, ebony fingerboard and bridge, and it's a very high quality instrument. Originally it had banjo pegs, and the earlier ones had a smaller pick guard. Mid-31 is when the full-size Martin pick guard appeared. And it also has no decal on the front of the peg head. That didn't start till about October of 31. It does have the name on the back of the headstock stamped on, not a decal, but actually stamped on the back of the neck. And it was stamped after the finish was applied, so you can often enough tell if an instrument has been refinished or oversprayed, if there's lots of lacquer in the Martin logo stamp on the back of the peg head, you know it's been worked on. But why don't you take it away now, Tony, and just say, how was it when you first saw the guitar, and what did you do on it, and what decisions did that involve?
Well, usually on these older instruments, especially these Martins, we usually tend to what we call the trifecta. Usually they need a net set and a re-glued bridge and new frets. Well, thankfully on this, I was actually able to save the original bar frets, and actually it worked out really good, because one thing I've noticed about bar frets is that there was still some meat left, and you had to take them down and level them just a little bit and recrown them, but they feel way more comfortable when they're just a little lower, somewhere between 30 and 40 thousandths. And so it was actually ideal that these frets had just enough left that we could level them and recrown them, and then they'd be in the proper plane to play well. And so this instrument actually does have the original bar frets in it. And I reset the neck, meaning I reset the angle so that the strings would be close enough to the fingerboard. And I also I had to build a new belly bridge for it, since the original had been damaged. Somebody had attempted repairs on that, and at that point it wasn't salvageable. So I made another one that looks just like the originals there. And probably I might have re-glued a brace or two, but the great thing about this one in its condition is that really there were maybe just a couple of tiny cracks. The body is is pretty much intact. And we did opt for, I think this instrument originally had those banjo style tuners on them, and but you know, and I guess halfway through the production life of this instrument, they actually did offer some right angle tuners. And so that actually is not a bad choice, like really out of character.
The right angle tuners came within about a month after this guitar was made.
Oh, really?
So that when we took this guitar in, it already had tuners changed. It came originally with banjo pegs, but it had already been set up for tuners like this, except that the tuners that were on it were Japanese, poor quality.
Right.
And so there was evidence of the original tuners, of another set of poor quality, and then a second set of poor quality. So this actually is therefore the fourth set of tuners on this guitar.
Yeah, and these are high quality tuners.
These are fine quality,
yes,
and fit right, look right, and tune extremely well. And the banjo tuners looked great, but they really didn't tune well. They had 4-to-1 ratio, and they weren't truly designed for the tension of guitar strings, so that Martin did give up on them in mid-31. And Gibson even tried them on a few models. They did some L2 models, and some of the L5 models in late 29 had banjo pegs, and they gave up on those pretty quick. They look really neat, and historically, it is true that this guitar did come with banjo pegs, but if somebody's going to actually play it on a daily basis to get the best performance out of it, these are the type pegs it would have had a month later, and they're tuners that work great. So we made the choice to do that.
You know what I continuously, I'm always amazed by is the sonic quality of these pre-war Martins. After I started working in Gruhn guitars, I didn't really know, I hadn't been in although I'd seen plenty of guitars and worked for Gibson guitars, but I hadn't seen a volume like that comes through this store. And like this instrument just really, when you hear the decay of it and hear the sweetness of the quality, along with the projection, you could sit across the room and it still sounds clear. And it's one of the reasons I love working on these things too, because they're really masterfully designed and were masterfully built and continue to be masterfully built, I might add.
The other thing about this is the neck contour on this is extremely comfortable and thoroughly modern.
Absolutely, and it's actually quite shallow compared to a lot of the models, and it just fits in your hand nice, for sure.
The OM models had an extremely comfortable neck that by modern standards feels absolutely full modern. It's not thick and clubby. Some of the ones later in the 30s, which had a steel T-bar in them, had a rather hefty neck, and it really got progressively thicker as you went up, whereas this neck is a fast action, comfortable neck, and it does not have a metal T-bar in the neck.
Right.
Bar frets are compression fretted so that it stiffens the neck with the type frets that are used. It actually, you can take a warp out of a neck just by compression fretting. Could you explain that?
And that's what we often do. Well, sometimes over time, or the neck will give back a little and there'll be a little too much relief. And so what we'll do is we'll choose, it depends on how bad it is, but sometimes we'll just choose and do at intervals. We'll take one fret out and either put in, with bar frets, we can put in a slightly larger fret, or sometimes, if you notice, sometimes I've pulled bar frets mostly over the extension, strangely enough, and they'll have someone has crimped little barbs in them with a tool, and that makes the part of the fret going into the neck wider, and it actually pushes the fingerboard back. And we'll use that kind of compression fretting, and it'll actually bring, relief is when there's too much the bend in the neck is what we call the relief. And if there's too much of that, then the string in the middle will be too far away from, it'll be too far to press down the string, and it'll be closer up here. It needs to be nearly straight with just the right amount of relief to allow the vibration of the string, the ellipse that it creates, to vibrate without making a buzz.
The point is, Martin did that at the factory, even when these were being made.
Yes.
They had varying degrees of slightly different thickness frets, and they used that at the factory in production and also in repair. If they needed to adjust a neck that did not have an adjustable rod when they were using bar frets, they used compression fretting at the factory. So that's one reason why they waited so long till 1934, late in the year, before going to a T-bar and modern frets. And Martin didn't actually go to having an adjustable truss rod until 1985. But this neck from 1931, actually, we dressed the frets slightly.
Right.
We didn't even have to adjust it was the correct contour.
It really was. It was already had a proper amount of relief.
The compression fretting on a neck of this age has kept this neck in supremely good playing order.
Absolutely, and we still use that
many years.
Compression fretting to this day. That's the method for making these instruments without truss rods have the proper amount of relief.
Thank you, and I'm going to go on to some questions.
See you guys.
So, second. Okay, we have more questions from our listeners. Richard says, thank you for the privilege, sir, of asking your opinion developed through your years on the acoustic guitar. As it ages or begins to season, how do you think this affects overall sound of the guitar? And do you think the torrefication process can speed up any of this natural aging in regards to sound and not looks? I've discussed this before, I'll say it again. Torrefication is a process of oven baking in an oxygen-free environment. It can give the physical appearance of aging, and it does also give a considerable degree of resistance to changes in humidity, so that the wood is less prone to contraction or expansion with less or more humidity. Wood can, especially in the winter and times when we have central heat going on in a house, the wood can shrink, which is bad news. If it can cause cracks. And also if in the summer you don't have dehumidification, which typically air conditioning will take care of, but some areas are more humid than others, you can have a problem there where you have too much humidity, and that can cause the wood to swell. But so far as tone, does torrefication change it? In spite of numerous companies that are touting this as being the equivalent of natural aging, but speeded up, I beg to differ. In my opinion, the harmonic response is not as rich. And I greatly question how well some of these instruments will age, or will they age gracefully? That remains to be seen. What I can say is that it is my experience that guitars that are built right in the first place sound good even when they are new, and they will mellow out. And it doesn't take nearly as long as a lot of people think. If they're played really hard for even as little as a day, you can hear a significant difference. And it is my experience, especially the custom shop guitars we get that have non-torified Adirondack spruce tops, that if they're played really hard, they not only open up quickly, you can tell virtually to the minute when they really have a breakthrough. And to the point where I've taken guitars to jam sessions, and in the middle of a tune, people from across the room say, "What happened? It doesn't look like he's playing any harder," but all of a sudden it just went like into hyperdrive, and they can hear the difference. And I think that torification, if anything, may prevent that wonderful happening. But time will tell. But in the meantime, I can tell you that all of the custom shop guitars that we order from Martin feature non-torified Adirondack spruce. So effectively, I'm putting my money where my opinion is. At any rate, we have had some more questions come in, and one of the questions that has come in regarded opinions about the various new model Les Pauls, and to discuss a fellow named Jack Frost says, "Hi, George. I'm considering getting a recent model Les Paul. There are a number of Gibson reissues available, 58, 59, and 60, plus standards and traditionals. The traditionals seem to be lower in price. If all original, what are your thoughts on this model? Are the pickups, playability, and workmanship comparable to other models? I would use this primarily for home recording and very occasional casual playing with friends. Thanks." And for that, I'm going to bring on Corey Terrell on our sales staff, who can discuss that, as well as some of the interesting Les Pauls that have come in here very recently.
Thanks, George. Well, we certainly have some Les Pauls. I'm going to get into what we just recently acquired and what we have in stock. I'm going to get into that in a couple of seconds, but Jack, excellent question. How I see things is one of the historic reissues is something that Gibson makes as far as the Les Pauls go that you just cannot go wrong with. Standards, traditionals, etc. It's on an instrument by instrument basis. They can really vary widely in quality. It's not I'm not knocking the company or anything. It's just the way that it's been for a while. But the historic reissues, the 58s, the 59s, and the 60s, as far as the bursts go, the quality is pretty great. I really can't remember seeing one, playing one, holding one that I just didn't think was really worth the money. So let's start there. Let's kind of start there. The 58s generally will be almost 59 specifications as far as the neck goes. I haven't seen 58s with a very varied neck profile. Most of them are a little bit on the larger side, a bigger profile, very comfortable in the hands, and their balance is excellent. And of course, color-wise, if color matters, you can get cherry sunburst. I've seen faded lemon burst style, what they call lemon burst tea bursts, iced tea bursts, which is important to some people and not important to other people. For me, it's really the neck profile. That's the biggest thing. But the quality of one of the historic reissues, like I said, excellent quality, well worth the money. And they're not cheap, but there'll be something that you'll play forever. Standards, again, there's a little bit of a variance between quality and years. And if you look at the serial number, when was this made? What run was this from? Traditional's not a big fan. Really not a big fan. I think that that you'd be better off with a standard. You'd definitely be better off with a historic reissue. So I think that's something that you should definitely look into. Now, getting into what I said we would get into as far as what we have in stock right now, we've got just an amazing selection of Les Pauls right now, from studios to ES models, which are semi-hollow with the F-holes, Les Paul body style. Very, very cool, nice and light, real super fun to play. All price ranges from the $900 price range up, you know, into the historic price ranges. So you definitely are going to probably want to email me. Somebody's going to want to email me out there for a list or a partial list of what we have. And I can be emailed at Corey@guitars.com. That's Corey @guitars.com. Don't hesitate to ask me any question that comes to your mind about what we now have in stock. It definitely would be well worth an email. That being said, I'm going to get you back to George. I thank you for your time. Again, Corey@guitars.com. Thanks.
All right, I'm back. John Parsons asked, did this OM come from a family? And the answer to that is yes. It had been in the family for many years. Was it simply stored under the bed? Well, at least we can say that it hadn't been used in many years, because the bridge was split in two and was certainly not in playable order, but it had been played for quite a while, but not beat up. The bridge was split and it needed a neck set, but and the tuners had been changed, because I'm sure that the original owner got very frustrated with the banjo pegs, but in other respects it had not been beat up. So bridge plate was still in good condition. It was not all that hard to replace the bridge. The frets were in good condition, and the instrument needed what for us is a relatively normal setup, and not something that is all that. Doing a neck set is not for an amateur, but the point is, guitars of that age, if they have been used and had string tension over the years, typically do need a neck set. So, plenty of questions to get through today. John Luth says he has a 1931 OM28 that has new style banjo pegs on it, but one time had right angle tuners. Is there any way he can find out what tuners it left the factory with? Send me an email, george@guitars.com, giving me the serial number, and we can easily then check and see exactly at what time it left the factory, and then we would know what kind of tuners it had. But in general, we can say that if it has a small pick guard, it almost certainly had banjo pegs originally. And if it has the inlay pattern, like I showed on this one that we have, with the inlays only at 5, 7, and 9, there is a high probability that it had banjo pegs. If it has the more full inlay pattern starting at the 5th fret and going to the 15th fret, you can be absolutely certain that it did not have banjo pegs originally, but with the serial number, I can narrow that down for you. So then, George Scanelli, why is it that when companies get sold, acquired, or change executive management, their quality seems to go downhill. This happened with Guild along with other companies. For example, the guitars produced by Guild in the 1950s and 60s were better quality than today. Same with Fender to some extent, in comparing the guitars that were manufactured pre-CBS versus post-CBS. My statement may not be entirely true, but it seems to hear more about the quality being very good in early years, but getting worse as the years goes on, like up to today. Why can't these companies just maintain their great standards and live up to their names like in earlier years? I know an exception to this is Martin, whereas the quality remained consistent through the years. Well, frankly, I don't agree. For example, in the case of Martin, no, their quality didn't remain consistent through the years. The ones they make today are far better than the ones they made in the 1970s or even into the 80s. And in some cases, they're better today than a lot of what they made even back in the 60s and into the 50s. Custom shop Martins I'm getting now, in my opinion, are better than what Martin made in the 1950s. And the standard production line models that Martin makes right now are definitely better than what they made in the 1970s or 80s. And even there, in some cases, better than anything they made in the 60s. And would even give the 1950s models a real run for the money in quality. I think they don't beat what Martin made in the 1930s, but they come surprisingly close. Martin makes great guitars. And the management at Martin right now and the craftsmanship that they have and what they're doing is very good. And I think it would be unfair to say that all Fenders after CBS were bad. That's just not true. There's management changes, and under CBS, certainly the quality was not nearly as good as it was pre-CBS. The company was sold to CBS in January of 1965 when Leo had health problems that he thought he wasn't going to recover from, and he was just getting burned out. But CBS sold out in 1985, and actually quality of new Fenders today, production models, as well as vintage series and custom shop models, is far better than it was when CBS was there. So frankly, Fender's making better guitars now than they did 50 years ago, and better guitars than some of what Fender made. You have to go back, as soon as CBS took over, by the end of 65, the quality was nowhere near what it was at the beginning of 65. And that's a long way back. But again, management at Fender right now is quite good. And their production techniques are good. And they make very respectable guitars. And even with Guild, I was involved with Guild. I was designing guitars for Guild from 84 through 88. And then I was even involved in management at Guild from 86, August of 86 through 88. And Guild has changed ownership several times since then. When I started at Guild, the quality in the mid-80s was not, in my opinion, as good as it had been when Alfred Gruhn was still there. But quality actually improved during my tenure there. And then it changed hands, though. The group I was with found out the joys of minority shareholdership, and a lot of my suggestions weren't followed. At any rate, I was out of that company by the end of 88, and it got sold to Chuck Foss, and I think quality suffered at that point. but later he sold the company to Fender. And Fender actually did quite a few things during their tenure running Guild that improved quality. But then they moved production from the Westerly, Rhode Island factory to the Corona factory in California, and I think quality went down. And then they moved it up to Tacoma, and quality changed again. And then they moved it to New Hartford, Connecticut, into the old Ovation factory, and that changed it again. And today, Guild has completely new owners, and frankly, they're making some very good guitars that I think compare very well to the original Guilds. But the point is, management is important. And it's important to have somebody in management who's not only a bean counter. You need bean counters, but you also need somebody with knowledge of the product and passion for it. And that can change over the years. It can go from good to not so good, and it could go back to good again, too. And right now, the quality of most new guitars from most manufacturers is better than it was previously. And there's others, like Taylor hasn't had any major management change. Bob and Kurt are still there, but they're probably making the best Taylors ever. And Andy Powers, also their new design chief, is extremely talented. But the point is, you can't lump all companies being together, that everything new keeps getting worse. It's not true. And the fact is, right now, there's a lot of really good guitars being made by a variety of companies. So I'll just leave it at that. For William Krause, I was wondering if you could discuss the similarities and differences between the arching and bracing of the Gibson Lore F5 and the Snakehead mandolin models of the 20s. Well, they're such different instruments. It's sort of like trying to compare apples to pineapples. Their Snakehead model Gibsons were made from 24 on up through about 27 on A model mandolins, and those were all oval hole mandolins with a pear-shaped body, whereas the Lore F5 has a scroll body, F-holes, elevated fingerboard, parallel tone bars. It's such a different instrument that what I can say is the Snakehead models, the A models, are very good, but do they have the bark that the chopped chords would have that an F5 can produce? No. Are the Snakeheads very good mandolins? Yeah, they're probably about the best A models that Gibson ever made. But all the mandolins made during the period, the so-called Lore period of 22 through the end of 24, are extremely good mandolins. Whether it's the A models or the oval hole F models or the F5, they're all very good, but only the F5 at that time had the F holes and parallel tone bars. So it's a very, very different beast. Scott Thiemer says, I worked at the University of Chicago for over 20 years after you were there, but I worked for the person who more than likely signed your diploma. I went to the University of Chicago starting in 63 and graduated in 4 years. I'm curious how you wound up in this business. Well, this is basically a hobby that got out of hand. I liked guitars, and there were plenty of people that I knew when I was in high school played, and there were plenty of folks at the University of Chicago who were very active in that scene. And I just found that I had this addiction for collecting guitars, and I could use exactly the same methodology that I would use in zoology for looking at guitars. And I look at them such that I'm a zoological taxonomist viewing guitars. So I put them in a Linnaean taxonomic order. And I use the same skills my dad has as a forensic pathologist to look at guitars and figure out what has happened to this particular one over the years. And I found for every one I found that I wanted to keep, I'd find 20 or 30 more that were things I uncovered in my searches, and I didn't need them, but they'd finance my collecting addiction. And eventually that got out of hand, and getting a degree specializing in reptile behavior is not a lot of jobs. But I could use the same skill set for guitars, and that's what I do. Troy Rye, how would you compare the new Martin Custom 18 style Synchro Mahogany with pre-1970 Martin guitars? Pre-1970 is a mighty long period. Martin's been in business since late 1833. But what I can say is that the new Synchro Mahogany guitars utilize the same type spruce, non-torrefied Adirondack that Martin used from 1945 on back throughout their history. They utilized the forward shifted scalloped bracing pattern of the 1930s up through late 1938 when they did rear shifted. But we modernized them with a more modern neck contour, although still having the 1 3/4 nut width. And we put in a drop saddle, which is much easier to work on, and an adjustable truss rod, which is also much easier if it ever does need adjustment. But so far as sound, they compare remarkably well, such that I think one has to go back pre-1940, get a guitar from Martin that truly sounds likely to beat the new Syncers after the Syncer's been played for at least a few weeks. Takes a little time to limber it up, although if you really pound on it hard, you can wake one up in as little as 2 or 3 days, but not if you just strum it softly. If you really, really, really pound it hard, play it full volume like you would be in a band and jam session where you're having to be heard with no mic, you can wake one of these things up really fast. And the new Martins are good. Scott Richardson, I've picked up a 1994 Taylor 410 that has been well played for the past 25 years. It's a great sounding guitar, but there's some noticeable fret wear and neck wear. While the tone does not appear to be adversely affected by this wear, I'm wondering if it's time for a refret. Does a refret, if needed, reduce a guitar's value? Would you recommend such a thing? Well, if it's buzzing and no longer playing as well as it should, then it's time for the refret, or at least for a fret dress. It depends how much wear there is. If it is wear that you can correct with a fret dress, there's no need to refret it. Just get someone to dress the frets. But they do have to know what they're doing because they can otherwise ruin them. If it is to the point where it needs a refret to play properly, then it's time to do it. And so far as what does it do to the value of your guitar, does it reduce the guitar's value? Well, the best is to have a pristine, perfect condition guitar that's never been played and has no fret wear. It's like a car. The best is to have a nice vintage car, like a 1957 Ford Thunderbird that has 1,000 miles on it, that belonged to a little old lady who never learned how to drive much. Or maybe a guy bought it, promptly had a heart attack and died, and the family put it in storage and drained the oil and the gas so that nothing messed up the engine, and put it up on blocks, and it's in museum perfect condition. But if you do something despicable like actually drive it or you play your guitar or drive the car, well, eventually it needs work. Now, worn out frets, even if they're the original frets, they're no longer to original specs, and they're not usable. And the guitar itself probably also has enough wear that it's not really extremely collectible to being totally pristine. But the point is, if the frets are worn out, they're not correct spec. Which would you rather have, worn out frets that you can't play, or an extremely professional refret job that, if done properly, can look virtually perfect? If you do a bad fret job, don't know how to pull the frets, you can damage the fingerboard, take chunks of wood out. That's bad. Bad work reduces value. Good work that is needed enhances value and certainly enhances utility. It's like if you have a car. You have a wonderful car, a Gullwing Mercedes, it's worth $1 million. You have a wreck. It's really messed up, bad. The frame's bent and it's dented up. Well, it's worth a heck of a lot less immediately after the wreck than it was immediately before the wreck. And if you take it to an extremely skilled restoration service, it may work on it for 6 months to get it right. Is it going to be worth as much afterward as before the wreck? No, but it's worth enormously more after the restoration than immediately after the wreck. And in the case of a used guitar that is needing a refret, it doesn't go back to being worth exactly as much as when the guitar was brand new condition, but it greatly enhances utility and value to do the needed work. And if repair could do nothing but reduce value, I could free up 6,000 square feet upstairs and get rid of 8 people. So I put my money where my mouth is in saying that good repair enhances value. Needing repair reduces value, and doing bad quality repair can destroy an instrument. You have to know what to do, what not to do, and how to do it. And for somebody who doesn't know how to do it, the most expensive repairs are the do-it-yourself jobs that you were not skilled enough to do properly, but you were too stingy to pay somebody to do it right. Or that you took it to somebody who you thought was a budget, shopped around and you got the lowest possible price, but you didn't get the best quality. So repair enhances value. Mark Henry asks, do the Sinker Mahogany Martin D18s come with any specific documentation? Well, on the neck block, they're just stamped custom, as would be any custom ordered guitar. Documentation, well, Martin has a spec sheet, which we can certainly, if somebody wants the spec sheet to know what it is they got, we can provide that. If they want an appraisal from us, that's free of charge. So yes, we document, and yes, Martin can document what they are and how they are different from a catalog standard model. And the ones that we have are different from any others that I've seen from any other dealer as well. We have our own particular specs that go into those guitars. But so they certainly are documentable as what they are, and Martin keeps meticulous records on anything that they make. Stephen Chrysophilie, hi George, I'm curious to know how Gruhn Guitars was featured in the credit card commercial, Visa or Mastercard ? Years ago. That commercial sure caught my attention. Well, interestingly enough, you remember that it was a credit card company, but you don't remember which one, but you remember Gruhn. I would say that that commercial, which was, by the way, a Visa card commercial, and it was specifically targeting the fact that at that time we did not take American Express. They had, basically, they were running a whole campaign of featuring retail shops or restaurants that took Visa but did not take American Express, and we were one of them. It aired for a full year. It was shown on the Olympics. It was shown on the World Series. It was shown on everything in between in 1993, including the Visa card commercial. Not only the Visa card commercial, but even on the Weather Channel. It was on everything. But I don't think it did much good for Visa. For one thing, I don't know anybody who takes Visa who doesn't also take take Mastercard. There's a fair number that don't take American Express that do take Mastercard and Visa, but virtually none that take Visa that don't also take Mastercard. And I don't think very many people select a credit card based on the fact that they don't take American Express. But at any rate, it did, I think, a great deal of good for us, but it didn't, if I had to pay for the commercial myself, it wouldn't have happened, because I know they had a budget of $500,000 to produce a 30-second commercial, and they probably spent $20 million on airtime, and it might have increased our business volume by $300,000 in the year that they ran it. And I can't imagine what good it did for the commercial for Visa, because about a third of the people who mentioned ever having seen the commercial complimented me on being in that great American Express commercial, which it wasn't. It was an anti-American Express commercial. About a third complimented me just for having been in it because it was great. And another third mentioned that was really great. It was one of them credit card companies, wasn't it? And they couldn't remember which one. But the point is, if you spend $50 million on airtime, and as many people remember it as having been the one that you were saying is your competitor, then it may not have been the best crafted commercial ever. At any rate, we have some more questions still. Jeff Bullock, some classical guitars have what I believe is called a double top. Any comments on this? The double top is a high-tech feature that has a sandwich construction with spruce on the top, spruce on the bottom, or whichever wood they're using, and has a lattice work that's a synthetic material that is not quite a sponge, but it creates a very vibrant space between the two extremely thin pieces of wood. And it can, coupled with a lattice bracing or other type modern bracing pattern, give considerable volume. I'm not a big fan of them because I think that the sound, while it's loud, doesn't have quite the sweetness to my ear that a solid wood top has. But the other thing is, if anything ever happens to it, it's fragile. And if it breaks, it's not very repairable. So in terms of how will it last over 20, 30, 50, a lifetime, I don't think that to me, it just doesn't have the long-term sustainability of a solid wood top. And the tone is somewhat different. But there are classical players who love them, if only because they sure enough do project. And there are some makers doing steel strings with that. It's a top that, again, if you have an accident with it, we won't be able to fix it for you. Bob Megas, I have a 1967 Gretsch 6120 numbered 7730, indicating it was the 30th guitar to leave the factory July of 67. As Fred Gretsch sold his company to Baldwin effective the 30th of June 67, it made July serial number guitars technically the first Baldwin-made Gretsch guitars. Edward Ball's book on Gretsch guitars states that after Baldwin took over, they almost immediately began making changes to the instrument, the most obvious of which was the substitution of brushed aluminum control knobs with the painted arrow G for the instead of the solid brass knobs. My 6120 retains the brass knobs. A year or two back, a gentleman brought a 6120 into the music store where I was teaching. It's number 7741. It has the Baldwin aluminum painted knobs. They'd be curious of what would constitute the last Gretsch made Gretsch, and that's the first part of my question. The last June shipped guitar, or the last guitar made with Gretsch features. Should the change in features be the detriment then? If the 6120 isn't the last Gretsch made 6120, then there are almost 10 more. Part two of my question, what other changes did Baldwin incorporate into the instruments after they took control of the brand, and how did they phase them in? Well, a lot of changes got phased in, but it's just a similar question actually to how quick did Fenders change after CBS took over? The answer is not instantly. First, they used up parts and they finished what was in progress. So the guitar you have is early enough that for all practical purposes, it was finished up using the pre-Baldwin parts. It didn't take Baldwin terribly long, though, to start changing specs. And the quality did change. They changed the style truss rod that they used. And instead of adjusting up at the peg head, it adjusted at the heel. And in general, those are considered less desirable. On the Country Gentleman model, instead of having the imitation F-holes that were just painted on, that's the way Chet liked it because he didn't want feedback. They actually opened up the F-holes. So they changed a lot of specs, and it was in multiple stages, too much to go into here. But what I can say is anytime a company changes ownership, there is a period of transition. Sometimes the quality improves with the new owner, sometimes it doesn't. If a company goes from being owned by a CEO who has a passion for the product and really is in love with guitars and with the product and cares deeply about quality, and it gets sold instead to a conglomerate that is run by bean counters, and there's nobody there in management who knows how to play a guitar, but they know how to cut corners on price, quality will go down. But if in turn, after a while, that same company gets tired of it, like CBS did, then, or Baldwin was mismanaged badly, and their whole operation collapsed. They got into all kinds of side ventures beyond Gretsch, and the Baldwin empire imploded, spectacularly so. It got later sold again. And the new Gretsch guitars today are way better than the Baldwin Gretsch guitars. So your particular guitar should be about the same value as one of the very last pre-Baldwins, because it's basically made with all pre-Baldwin parts, and they didn't go in and fire every factory worker. It took time for quality to change as specs changed. But so it's the same basic principle regardless of which company it may be. John in Wilmington, North Carolina says this question has to do with the setup by Martin on a new Martin guitar. Does Martin complete and build and then work to get the 12th fret string height by working with the saddle height, or are all saddle heights the same on their guitars? Does Martin have a minimum saddle height above the bridge? What 12th fret low E height is Martin going for on a new D or quadruple O guitar? I note I own two of your Martin Gruhn Customs that do not have a truss rod. The Martin guitars that he would have that don't have a truss rod are the style 21s that have a steel T-bar in the neck. Those are no longer in production at this time, but the sinker mahogany models that we have now are all with adjustable rod. But Martin does have specs and action heights that they are aiming for, but they will individually adjust guitars so that not every guitar is going to leave with exactly the same saddle height. When they're setting the neck, this is done by hand, and while they have highly skilled labor, but there will be some variation, and they will adjust action at the saddle and height individually as needed to get the guitars to where they play at what they consider to be optimum. So there will be some limited variability, but in general, Martins leave with what electric players may feel is medium or medium high to an electric player who wants it darn near flat on the board. But Martin wants to be able to set their guitars up where you can play it with dynamic range. They are not high action. They are certainly set up today much lower action than they were in the early 70s, when the philosophy at Martin back then was bluegrass players want it super high, make the nut and the saddle so high that the dealer will have to adjust it down to whatever the customer asks for. But since it's easier to take it down than it is to take it up, they sent them out high. These days, Martin sets it up where we rarely have to do any setup work at all. We like the setup the way they come in, and they actually do use human judgment in their setup work. One question from Jerry Black: do Norman Blake players have a unique setup? And then he has heavy strings, question mark. Norman liked medium bass strings with light trebles, and he likes relatively low action. But frankly, that doesn't mean that everybody else has to play with that same setup. And the other point is Norman Blake plays guitars of quite a few different models and varieties, Martins and Gibsons and others. And he does like vintage instruments, and not all are set up the same, because the ideal setup for a Gibson Nick Lucas model is not the same as for a Martin Dreadnought. And the ideal setup for a Martin Triple O is different from either one of them. Norman adjusts his playing style to the guitar and gets the best he can out of each one, and each one is set up so that it really suits him, but it suits him to have it set up for the optimum best for that guitar. And we have a few more questions that we'll just leave for next week. We're pleased that there was enough coming in, and it doesn't hurt to have a few that those who haven't gotten their questions answered yet, they're not ignored. I'll get to them next week. So have a good one, and we'll see you in a week.